This is the IDP After Show.
Hello and welcome to the IDP After Show. I am your host, Jeff Pomazal. In this episode, my special guest, Eric Harms, and I are going to dive into the world of the IDP defensive line stock market and do a little buy, sell, and hold. Eric, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me on.
This is looking forward to this one. So, want to get into your IDP mind here a little bit. So, as you know, Eric, playing the Dynasty League, it's a lot like playing the stock market. We want to obviously acquire low and sell high when we can. So Eric and I are going to attempt to become IDP investors, and we're going to take a look at some defensive linemen we are buying, players who we currently feel are undervalued and might have a slight uptick in production in the upcoming season, players we are selling, some players that might regress a little from last season but still could have a pretty hefty return, and finally some players that we're holding. And these are going to be players that our league mates aren't really interested in, but we just can't bring ourselves to letting them go. Eric, how's that sound to you?
Sounds amazing.
All right, let's do this. All right, so obviously we all want to acquire players like TJ Watt, Myles Garrett, and Max Crosby, but that would really decimate our depth and draft pick status. So we want to pick some players that are on the verge of a breakout that we can add to our rosters without decimating that draft capital. Eric, who's a defensive lineman that fits the bill for you?
I really like Matthew Judon. I think he had a great 21 and 22, had 17 sacks and 16 pressures in 22, and 14 sacks on 64 pressures in 21. And then he got hurt early last year. And you know how our society is. It's what have you done for me lately? And I think people kind of forget exactly how good a player is when they've been off for a year. So I think it's a good opportunity to buy Judon. He's going at the end of the third round in our best ball drafts, which kind of tells me if you're in win now mode, it's the time to maybe see if you can get him at a little bit of a discount.
Before I go ahead and share mine, I just question, do you feel having new head coach who is a defensive player himself helps Judon a little bit? Is that something that you take into consideration at all in a player like him?
Yeah, I don't know that it changes so much because Belichick was such a defensive mind anyway. And new coaches, of course, Belichick disciples one of his coaches. So I just don't think that's going to change a whole lot. There are some other defensive ends on the team, but nobody really of Judon's caliber. They're kind of younger, developing players. It just doesn't worry me about any of those guys, and I think he's still the guy.
Do you think he'll be finished 2024 as a New England Patriot, or do you think he'll get traded?
That's a good question. Wish I knew the answer to that.
Okay, yeah. Well, we all want the crystal ball, but I just know that there were some like rumors, and his name had been kind of thrown out there. You know, as a team that's rebuilding, obviously, and like you said, Judon is a very capable player and someone who could put a team over the top. You know, like Baltimore. If he's going to be a player that's going to finish the season with the Patriots, does that change your view on him?
No, it doesn't really. I think if somebody wants to buy him from the Patriots, then they're doing that for a reason. He's going to play. Hopefully it's a team that's gone in for a championship themselves in the Super Bowl, and maybe they can help them do it, get a lot of rack up a lot of stats in the process.
Well, I'm going to pivot to my second player just because it's going to fit in really well with your take here on Judon. And I picked as a player for me to be interested in right now is Christian Barmore, the defensive tackle for the New England Patriots. And this is more for leagues that have a defensive tackle requirement. Maybe the word's already out on him. I know he had a great season last year, but maybe there's a chance you can still acquire him in a deal. He really had a great breakout last year in his third year. He played 750 snaps. He finished the year with 56 tackles, 34 QB hurries, 7 more QB hits, and 8 sacks. Not only did he have a great statistical season, but he also was very efficient in the run game, and he's really become kind of that cornerstone player for the Patriots defense. He really had a great second half to the season where he had 29 combined tackles and 5 sacks in his last 7 games. So he had much more of his production at the second half of the season. And what I really liked about him as I was starting to dig a little deeper is the last 4 games of the season, he showed some versatility where he played left, right defensive tackle in back-to-back games. But then he also started at left and right defensive end to finish weeks 16 and 17. So clearly a player that's really versatile. It might kind of be a cheat code at the defensive tackle position if he's getting some defensive end snaps. And obviously the Patriots are really invested in him as they just signed him to a 4-year extension for a cool $92 million. So definitely a player that, like Judon, I think team is going to kind of lean on, and they're going to become pretty pivotal for the Patriots in their life after Belichick. So definitely Barmore and Judon are players that we're interested in. Eric, who is your other defensive end that you're currently trying to acquire?
Before I get to that, I love Barmore, and I drafted him a couple years ago in the 5th round of a rookie draft, held on to him. Macri kept bugging me to get rid of him, to trade him to him. And I finally relented last year in a trade that involved JOK and Kendry Miller coming my way. And I regretted it very soon after, because that's when he started blowing up last year. And so Macri finally wore me down and got him from me. But
so kind of note to self, whenever Macri's interested in a player, don't do it, right?
Hold on to him.
Yeah, hold on to him. Or try to get him in other leagues. Yeah.
So. Well, I needed help at linebacker and running back. So my second player is a defensive tackle, Javon Hargrave. Like you said, with Barmore, it's for those defensive tackle leagues. He's a great player, a Pro Bowler, and another player just like Judon that, not just like Judon, but he was not hurt last year. He was just had kind of a down year as far as sacks, but his other numbers were still really good. He had the 8th most pressures from a defensive tackle last year, and pass rush grade was 86.5. Had a 13.6% win percentage from the inside, which was 14th. And he just seems to be undervalued right now. Looking at our best ball drafts, he's going in the 9th round and has actually slipped even more since the draft. He's now going around more in the round 10 area. And I just don't understand why. He's one of the top defensive tackles. And I think if people are sleeping on him, then it's prime time to acquire him.
You know, as we mentioned the best ball drafts, and we'll dig into them a little more in a little bit, but I feel that those best ball drafts right now are kind of really indicative of player value or current trends with them. So like using that information as data to see who player or teams are in on and who they're out on, I think that's just a really valuable tool. And like you said, Hargrave is kind of slipping right now, and whether that's rookie fever or, like you mentioned before, what have you done for me lately kind of attitude, this is a prime time to pounce on players like that who are still efficient, doing really well from season to season, but maybe just don't have the sack total. And sack numbers, Eric, are just very, very dependent on the season. The player could be doing everything the same that they did in previous years, but they're just not getting that quarterback on the ground. So not a very repeatable or stat from year to year.
I agree.
Thank you. Closing out our players to be that we're in on, I have Uchenna Nwosu for the defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks. Again, kind of a common theme here. Players coming off an injury, had a really solid 2022. After he left the Chargers, he signed with the Seahawks. He posted 59 tackles, 35 QB hurries, 15 hits, and 10 sacks. That was good for DL13 and Big 3 scoring in 2022. And then in 2023, everyone was in on him. He was going really high in drafts, and then he got hurt with a torn pec in week 7. And not only did his season get derailed, but also the Seahawks season kind of got derailed on the defensive side. They finished in the bottom third after Nwosu left. Teammate Boye Mafe called him kind of the key to the defense. And now that Bobby Wagner and Jordan Brooks are both gone, I feel that Nwosu is going to have to play even more of a role, and I think that the new coaching staff there realizes that he's going to have to be pretty versatile, and they're going to do some things to kind of move him around the formation and get him in some alignment. So right now, Nwosu is currently being drafted as a DL35 in best ball, and I just think that that's extremely undervalued for somebody who's going to play such a big role. Knock on wood, if he can stay healthy for the season in Seattle. So, all right. All right, now, Eric, we're going to move on to who are some names of some players that you have on your roster that you might want to move on right now, try to maximize the value, especially if they're pretty high at the moment, and you feel that maybe their 2024 season is not going to be replicated what they did in 2023. So who you got there?
My first one is Carl Granderson, who's a fine player, but there are people that just love Granderson. Like, they love him a little too much. He's gone as high as 9 overall in one of the best balls. It was one of the early ones, but his range is kind of outrageous in those best ball drafts. I know we're talking dynasty here, but he's gone anywhere from 9 to 71. It's just all over the place. So I think you can find that guy in your league that loves Carl Granderson and get more than maybe he's going to give you during the season. He typically goes in the 4th round, which is still pretty high, usually around that area. But he's had 8 or 9 sacks the last couple of years. He does support it with tackles, which is nice floor to have. He's just too highly valued, it seems like, at least in the near term, by people. And I think it's a good time to see what you can get. Find somebody that likes him more than you do, and see if you can get somebody that somewhere else you need.
So what you're telling me, Eric, is he's not going to be rostered on any of your best ball drafts just because if he's going in the 4th round, you have other guys that you're keen in on in 4th, 5th round there.
Yeah, I'd have to look at my roster sheet, but I don't think I have him anywhere. If I do, it's very few.
Maybe you were the guy that drafted him at 71.
Maybe.
Maybe.
I don't remember for sure.
Yeah. Come on, you've only done what, 40 or 50 best ball drafts now? So
not that many yet. It's around getting close to 20 now here. But.
Okay. Company man. All right. So my first player that I'm kind of selling right now is kind of a lightning rod player. Kayvon Thibodeaux, defensive end for the New York Giants. He's currently being drafted right now as the 11th defensive end, the 16th player being drafted in IDP best ball drafts right now at the moment, which is really head-scratching to me. There was a time early in the draft season where he was going ahead of Brian Burns, his teammate, who I feel is a much more dominant player, a much more consistent player, and it just didn't make sense that both of those players were going mid-second, right around the turn area there. So Thibodeaux is poised, though, to have a big breakout third-year season after the Giants did sign Brian Burns. And he did jump from 4 sacks to 11.5 from year 1 to year 2. But I'm just here pumping the brakes just a little bit on the Thibodeaux love, just because in 9 games last season, including a 0 in Week 10 versus a division foe of the Dallas Cowboys, he failed to score double-digit points in Big 3 scoring. And for me, if I'm investing not only in best ball, but also my season-long leagues in a player that is that inconsistent, that's not getting plays or not getting tackles or sacks in more than half of his season, I can't afford that in my lineups week in and week out, that a player that's going to get single-digit points and in some cases a 0. So I'm kind of out on him. Digging a little further into his 178 points that he did score last season in Big 3 scoring, 63 of those points came in just 2 games. And so when you think about a best ball player, like Thibodeaux is truly a player that you want to roster in best ball just because of those huge spike weeks, but you're going to have to draft him in the 2nd round with your 2nd pick for a player that might only show up 3 or 4 times in your roster for the entire season, and that just seems too expensive to invest a 2nd round pick in when there's much more safer, much more consistent picks week in and week out. So for that price, I'm out. And like you said before, like there's probably somebody in your league that's a Thibodeaux truther, and you're probably going to be able to maximize your value from them. So
He's young and he has a big name. He was an early draft pick. If you've read my fades article, I feel pretty much exactly the same as you about that, Jeff. And I'm out on Thibodeaux. I'm not going to draft him because he's just going higher than I'd be willing to take him.
All right, so no Granderson, no Thibodeaux for.
No.
Got it. All right, you got another player there that you're currently trying to sell?
Yeah, my other one is Kobe Turner, and it's one of those, a rookie coming off of a big year. He's kind of a popular young name, a guy that people want to acquire because he's that young, hot commodity. And he did rack up 12 sacks last year. And they came on just 50 pressures, which isn't horrible, but that's a pretty big conversion rate. And so I think there's going to be some regression there just based on that. And then he loses Aaron Donald. And when two players need to block Aaron Donald, there's fewer hands on Kobe Turner. And I think that's going to change this year. They brought in Braden Fisk to slot in next to him, but he's not going to command the attention Aaron Donald did, at least not initially. No, nobody will. So I just think between, I think, natural regression plus not having Aaron Donald there, I think Kobe Turner kind of becomes the man that gets the attention. Not that I like Braden Fisk, but I think that's going to be a little bit different year for Kobe Turner this year. So I think I'm selling now. I think his value is going to be the highest it's going to be at this time, and it's the time to sell him.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the Aaron Donald effect because, like he's probably one of the, I know the word generational talent gets thrown out a lot, but he truly was like a generational talent, and the fact that like he just commanded so much attention, double, triple teamed, and when you're, like you said, that's just going to make everyone else's job so much easier, and you just can't replace that. So agree. All right, my last player that I am currently trying to get off of my rosters is Mr. Josh Sweat, defensive end for the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles' defense as a team has been one to invest in over the last several seasons. They've been kind of a high draft capital, Georgia Bulldog really led team, and they've gotten a ton of talent on that team. They were scoring points left and right with turnovers and sacks and everything like that. So Sweat's name has been one that's kind of seemed to rise just with the fact that he has been kind of attached to that. Last year, currently he's being drafted as the edge 30, D lineman 36 in our drafts right now. So right around that 5th and 6th round. He did have a really big 2022, as all Eagles did in 2022. He had 48 tackles and 11 sacks. He finished the season with 186 points, and he finished DL 19 in Big 3 scoring. Outside of that season, Sweat's highest season scoring total was 129 points, which he's done twice, and that's only good for DL 62-ish, depending on the year. And so by no means is that a league winner, especially someone you're drafting in the 5th and 6th round. So Sweat, like Thibodeaux, I think has generated some buzz just because of free agency. A couple of players we're going to mention here later, players coming on to the Eagles, players leaving the Eagles might have impacted Sweat's value, but it doesn't change for me who the player is. And he's we know who he is at this point in his career. He's been in the league for 6 years. We know that he's not going to be anything more than 186 points at best, probably more 130 points. So for that reason, if I can move Sweat in any deal, I'm smashing that accept button.
And that's interesting because Josh Sweat is my first hold. He had a really good start to the season last year. He had 7 sacks in the first 9 games on 46 pressures. So he was off to a really fantastic start, and then faded. And I'm not really sure what the reason is behind the fade. The Eagles kind of faded as a whole. It seemed like there was a lot of trouble going on the team. They changed defensive coordinators, just lots of turmoil going through that team. And he ended with only 1 sack in the last 8 games on 24 pressures. And so his playing time didn't really change. It's just one of those weird things. I think that he was on the pace to carry on from 2022. And it just kind of fell apart for him the second half of the season last year. So I'm holding him in the hope that he can put another full season together again, like he did in 2022. And we'll see what happens.
And it's kind of interesting, like you kind of mentioned, it was a perfect segue going from a sell to a hold, just because of that idea of, what's your roster look like? What are your league scoring settings? What's your roster construction like? How many bench spots can you have? All of those things obviously play a role in this. But, if for me, I'm looking at like, he's not going to do anything more than that. I'm selling. And, like a manager like Eric might be like, I'm going to stick it one more year. That's a guy I think can have a bounce back, and, I don't want to lose on, so I'm going to kind of hold on for one more season. So my first player that I'm kind of holding on to is Zach Allen, and he is a kind of a hybrid defensive end, defensive tackle, depending on the league, kind of with his positional eligibility as for the Denver Broncos. Full disclosure, I've been a huge Zach Allen fan since he's been in Arizona. He had his best season last year as a pro in Denver, where he played nearly 200 snaps more than he did previously. He set personal highs in sacks, in tackles, and in snaps. Usually when you play more snaps, your efficiency goes down, but that actually was the opposite for Allen. He actually improved in a lot of those metrics, according to PFF. And so I really like Allen's role on the team. He came over with Vance Joseph, so he's still got the defensive coordinator, who just so happens to be the defensive coordinator who was in Arizona when they drafted him. So there's familiarity there. They kind of are on the same page. They got the same philosophy. And with Allen having that defensive tackle eligibility in some leagues, he's kind of that like cheat code player. So again, if you're playing in a league that requires defensive tackle, Zach Allen is probably one of those players that wouldn't take a lot to acquire. He's currently the DL64 right now, but he's definitely a player I want to keep a hold of, just because I feel that he's going to have another spike in some of those productional stats. So. Eric, that brings us to you for your second hold player.
Sorry. My second player is Jonathan Allen. So Washington Commander has a new coach. I don't know if you've heard, but Dan Quinn is now the coach of the Commanders.
What?
And I think that changes that defense quite a bit. He likes to bring pressure, and I think Jonathan Allen will be one of the beneficiaries of that. You might worry a little bit about who they have on the edge, but I think that's one of the reasons they brought Luvu in as well. Somebody that can blitz from the edge a little bit too. They brought Dorrance Armstrong in. They brought in Fowler, Cleveland Farrell. So they've kind of got a hodgepodge of guys that can maybe help out on the edge enough that Allen and Payne can do some damage on the inside. And it doesn't seem like he's really had those inside guys while he was in Dallas. None of the real big name talented guys. Kind of the opposite situation here. But Allen only had 6 sacks last year on 49 pressures. But he had a 15% win percentage, which is really, really good. And with Dan Quinn leading the team, dialing up pressures, I think he's going to eat this year.
No, I like that call. I think that anytime you get a defensive-minded coach and somebody who is proven, Quinn's got a great track record in his time in Dallas, that he's really done a lot with the defensive pieces that he has, and Allen seems to be a great chess piece for him. Funny that you mentioned division rivalry for my last hold right now, but it's Sam Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. Similar to Allen in Denver, I think Sam Williams is likely to see a huge bump in snaps, despite the fact that Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys are saying that they're all in. They haven't really done anything in free agency to dispel that they're really all in. And actually, in fact, they like you mentioned, they lost a lot of players on the defense side of the ball. They lost Dorrance Armstrong, who just happened to be last season in a heavy rotation with Sam Williams. And so Armstrong played 468 snaps last season. And if Williams can even get half of them, he's going to be really close to about 650 snaps. And so combine those vacated snaps with Williams' 12% pressure rate, you've got a player that's kind of poised to make a big jump in his third year as a pro. Now remember, he was a second-round draft pick, and so He's got the draft capital. He's obviously got the talent to be drafted that high. And now you're presenting him with a bunch of vacated snaps. And going into his third year, that's kind of the year players figure it out. So for a player right now that's going off the board as the defensive end 70, I just think that's an easy hold, or I guess he could be a buy, I guess, in that case. But if I'm having him, I'm going to hold on one more year, just see what I can get out of him. So, are
you concerned at all about the scheme change in Dallas? Assumed scheme change, I guess.
Yeah. Anytime you lose a player like Quinn, I think there's going to be a year or two where they kind of hold on to a lot of the old run just until they get the players in there that they want. There's always the scheme change, and you have to get the players in there that have the positional fit. And Williams is going to be one of those players, I think, that regardless of position or scheme, he's going to be on the field. So they don't have anybody else, regardless of what Jerry Jones says, being all in. They haven't done anything in free agency to bring anyone in. So they gotta have somebody out there making plays. So why not Sam Williams? So. All right, so now, Eric, that we've kind of gone through some of the players that we feel that fit some of those categories as a player we're actively trying to acquire on our rosters, players that we're trying maybe to move off of our rosters, and players that we're not giving up on just yet. We're going to head on over to the IDPshow.com website, and we're going to bring up the current IDP ADP and dive into some players and offer our takes on who we would buy, sell, and hold based on this current data. Now, again, all of this data is being pulled from the 2024 IDP best ball drafts that are going on, and all of this data is available over at the websites, along with numerous articles, rankings, trade tools, all over the website. So do yourself a favor and go over there and visit the website and check it out for yourself. So for this exercise, Eric, what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that we are currently rostering all three of these players on one of our teams, on our dynasty teams, and we're going to talk about our roster construction and management if we had the privilege, maybe in some cases, of having all three of these players. So our first one, we're going to start off with a really juicy one. We're going to start off at the top of the draft. We're going to have some really big name young studs to have to make kind of a difficult decision with. So first one is Aiden Hutchinson. He is currently DL6. Will Anderson, DL9, and Kayvon Thibodeaux, DL11. So Eric, if you had those three players, obviously roster construction and setting all plays a factor, but who are you buying, holding, and selling from that list?
That sell's a tough one, man. Okay, I'm gonna buy Will Anderson. I think you can get him a little bit cheaper than Aiden Hutchinson right now. So I'm gonna buy him. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, and just going to keep getting better. I'm holding Aiden Hutchinson because the man is a stud, and we saw it at the end of last year, had some really big games, and want him on my team. And then obviously, as we talked about earlier, I'm selling Kayvon Thibodeaux.
Is that a Freudian slip, Eric? What was
that? Thibodeaux reminds me a lot of Floyd statistically, so he gets a lot of sacks on very few actual pressures.
I'm very much the same on board with you on this one. I think Will Anderson's brightest days are ahead of him. He's playing on a very improved defense. They brought in more pieces this offseason. He's a year older. He only scored, I shouldn't say only. Hutchinson scored 176 points as a rookie, and Anderson scored 137, but Anderson missed 2.5 games. So I don't think the gap between Will Anderson and Hutchinson is as big as it looks right now. Hutchinson's obviously a player that you're going to want to keep, but he might be a player actually that if you want to maximize your roster, he might be a player that you could really sell for a huge gap. And if you are going from Hutchinson in your starting lineup to Will Anderson, I don't think that's a significant drop-off by any means. And if you can maximize your talent on your roster, I could not imagine what the return on a player like Hutchinson would be right now. Like you mentioned, just coming off the season and the hot end to the season, that recency bias is a real thing. So, last time you saw Hutchinson on the field, he was doing everything. So, that might be an option to sell him right now. Thibodeaux is definitely a player I try to get out of right now, but if you're not finding someone who's a truther, it's going to be very little in return. So he might just be a player just to hold, just to see what happens, So
yeah, I just think the truthers for Thibodeaux are out there. They're
Okay.
seem plentiful. I think 1 out of 12 people is probably a truther, at least 1 out of 12. So I think typically you're probably going to find somebody that's going to be higher on Thibodeaux than you are.
Well, I got to find better leagues then, because. All right.
But not in your leagues, huh?
No, not in. No. So if any of my league mates are listening, the sell window is there. So, all right. Moving out to our next grouping of players. This is going to be our seasoned vets who are just really consistent players that have done year in and year out. So we've got Montez Sweat, currently DL 13. We have Trey Hendrickson, DL 14, and Hassan Reddick, DL 15. Eric, who are you buying, selling, and holding of these three?
Well, I'm going to sell Sweat. He had 16 sacks last year, but really the pass rush grade was just kind of average. The underlying stats were just okay. I think he probably regresses to the maybe 10 to 12 sack range, maybe. So I think selling him now is maybe the best time to sell him after that season he just had. I'm gonna hold Hassan Reddick because I don't know what else you can do with him. I think nobody's going to buy him. Nobody knows if he's coming back from Japan and is cosplaying. So what do you do with the guy? You can't buy him. I don't want to buy him. You can't sell him. You just kind of have to hold him. And then I'm buying Trey Hendrickson and hoping that somebody is scared off by his trade demands and his threat to retire, which are just ploys to get the money he deserves, because the guy was a beast. He's been really good the last couple of years, tied for the most sacks last year, and his underlying numbers are really good as well. He had 6th highest win percentage and the 6th highest pass rush grade last year amongst edges. So that puts him in elite company, and that's the guy I'm going to buy.
Yep. I 100% agree with you. I'm buying Hendrickson, just consistent. He's got 39 sacks in the last 3 seasons, and I think he's a motivated player. Obviously, he's looking for that contract. He's looking for it. So, if a player is willing to threaten retirement, and he's already said that he wants a new contract, he's definitely going to be a player that's going to be motivated to get that big payday. And like we kind of mentioned, this is that veteran group that this might be their last opportunity for that big bag, and so they're going to try to maximize all the potential that they can. And so Hendrickson is definitely one of those type of players. I'm also selling Sweat. The Bears had very few draft picks this year in the draft, and what they did with the draft was all on the offensive side of the ball. There is a great core of linebackers in Chicago. There's a great core of secondary pieces in Chicago, but the defensive line, it's Montez Sweat, and that's about it. And so, a player, like you said, he can generate some buzz because he came off a good sack season last year. He generated some buzz with his trade. He's definitely a player that I want to try to maximize that buzz around and try to move off my roster. And like you mentioned, Reddick, you really can't do anything with because we don't know where his head's at. And he's only 2 seasons removed from that 18 sack season. So, maybe he starts out hot and you can move him, but like you said, you just can't do anything with a player like that right now.
It's kind of amazing. You would think the Jets, when they traded for him, would have known about his contract demands and would have already figured that into the trade and been ready with an offer, but apparently not. It's kind of crazy.
Well, maybe he and Aaron Rodgers are off on some trip somewhere, figuring out all of life's secrets. So,
yep.
So, all right, our next grouping of players, Eric, is a group of players who have flashed at times in their early careers. They're still pretty young, but just haven't been consistent to be considered elite at their position yet. And these are players like Rashawn Gary, DL 23. We have Jermaine Johnson is DL 25, and Trayvon Walker is DL 26. So, Eric, let me ask you again, of these three, who you buying, who you selling, who you holding?
This one's a little tougher for me, but I'm going to buy Rashawn Gary. I think maybe there's a window right now to buy. He had a decent year last year, but not a great year. Certainly not as good as his previous 2 years prior to last year. And I think the injury had something to do with that. So I'm hoping when I buy him that he's going to come back and be that same presence he was before his injury. And then I'm going to hold Jermaine Johnson. I like Jermaine Johnson a lot. He had his breakout last year. I think that continues. I think being in his third year, he'll continue to grow and maybe not quite as efficient as last year, but I think he's going to continue to be a real solid player. And Trevon Walker, I know it's just been 2 years, and he was a project when he was drafted, but I think this is the prove it year. He's got to do something this year. It's not just that he hasn't been good. He just hasn't even been average. Hasn't done a whole lot. So he just worries me. I'm going to try to sell him and hope that his name and his high draft capital, people will buy him just for that reason, and I get something for him.
Yeah. Again, I totally agree with all three of these doing the same thing. Rashawn Gary is definitely a buy. He just got paid. His offseason clips, his training clips look amazing, which everyone's does at this time of year, but he really looks like a motivated player. I think that whole Green Bay unit is just an ascending team, on the offensive side of the ball, and I think the defensive players really rally around that too. And so I think this is really an up-and-coming strong team, and I think Gary's going to be kind of the centerpiece on that defensive side of the ball. Like you, I love Jermaine Johnson. I've loved him since his days back at Florida State. He's really still kind of learning the position. Like, it was kind of a new thing for him, even in college, to play defensive end. And so he's just kind of learning. He's only, played the position 3 or 4 years. So he's kind of that, savant where he's trying to figure those things out. I think moving on from John Franklin Myers and Bryce Huff too provided an opportunity for him to get more snaps. And like you mentioned, his efficiency might go down, but I don't play in any fantasy leagues where I get points for efficiency. I just need tackles and sacks. You can be the worst player out there, and if you're still getting sacks and tackles, hey, sign me up, right? Yeah. Johnny the Greek will back me up for the cornerbacks. Hey, we don't want good cornerbacks. We want those mid cornerbacks that they get targeted. So sign me up all day. So, and Trevon Walker, like you kind of said, I think he's more of a victim of being overdrafted. It's not really his fault of the player who he is. It was just, scouting department, whatever, drafted him too soon. And like you said, hopefully the early draft capital lets me get out from under him. His PFF grades look like a fall day in the rolling hills of Wisconsin, because they are filled with beautiful yellows and reds and things like that. But that's not the color that you want to see in your PFF score. So if I can get anything for a player like that right now, I'm letting somebody else take the risk on that one. So, well, we didn't want to leave our defensive tackle listeners without getting a little defensive tackle love. So we've got 3 defensive tackles here. Ed Oliver, who is currently DL 38, Jalen Carter, who is DL 40, and Christian Barmore is DL 41. So, Eric, if you were rostering all 3 of these defensive tackles, who you buying, who you selling, who you holding?
I'm going to sell Oliver. I think he's to some degree proved the most. Barmore had a really good year last year, but I think he's had the best years. I'm going to see what I can get out of him. I really like Barmore and Carter, and I think they're going to be growing and improving and are younger. So I think I'm going to see what I can get for Oliver. I'm going to hold Carter, see what he's doing. Hopefully he grows, like I said, and find out what's going on there. And I'm going to buy Barmore back from Macri. And
Hear that, Macri? He's coming for you. He's coming for you.
So I like Barmore a lot. I always have. And he really started to show quite a bit last year, like you said earlier. And I think he's going to be a key cog for that defense in New England. And I want him back on my team.
That's the whole point of this episode, is just a plea to Macri that we're getting him back. So I am buying Barmore. Totally agree. I think he had obviously a great season last year. He scored 179 points last season on 750 snaps, which is just over 24 0.24 points per snap, which is amazing for a defensive tackle. I'm actually going to sell Jalen Carter here, not because I don't think he's going to be great, not that he doesn't have all the tools, but there's probably not a player on the defensive tackle position that has more buzz right now or a higher value than Carter. He had 117 points last season on 599 snaps, good for 0.19 points per snap. So a little bit below Barmore, but actually it's kind of surprising. He was actually even fewer points than Ed Oliver last season. So Oliver's going to be my hold. And the reason being is if I can move on from Jalen Carter and acquire a player like an aging Ed Oliver plus another piece, I'm getting just as much production. A player that right now in Ed Oliver that I hope Jalen Carter becomes in this next season, and then I still get that additional piece. So I'm kind of treating more recently my defensive IDP dynasty leagues more as like almost redraft, where I'm kind of trying to turn it over more frequently and not looking at those 3-4 year windows, but I'm looking more as a 1-2 year window, especially on the defensive side of the ball as it turns over so quickly. And I'm going to try to capitalize on that value of a Jalen Carter right now and the hype and the buzz that he's got. And if I can move on to an Ed Oliver, and get an additional pick, maybe a late second, maybe a third, something like that, I think that's a no-brainer, especially in a deep draft like this. So, speaking of drafts, we don't want to leave the rookies out of this. So, Eric, looking at our 3 top edge defensive rookies this year, Dallas Turner is currently DL38, Jared Verse is currently DL43, and Latu is DL44. And I know that those names have kind of changed as the draft data has come in, but as they sit right now, who are you buying, who are you selling, and who are you holding?
I'm going to buy Latu. I really like Latu's skill set. He's got the most diverse pass rushing skills of these 3. He has answers for the things that the offensive linemen are trying to do to him. Whereas Verse and Turner, Verse is more of a bull rusher, and Turner's got speed. I really like Latu of these 3, so I'm going to buy him. I'm going to hold Verse. I think he probably gets the most snaps this year, as you said. The shorter windows is good for IDP, so I want to hold Verse and hope he does actually get those snaps. There's just really nobody else there for the Rams. There's Byron Young on the edge, Michael Hutchinson, however you say his name, and I should not say this joke, so I won't. And then I'm going to sell
Now we're
Dallas.
all curious. Now we're all curious.
No. It's an internet thing. And then
it doesn't have to do with a certain sound effect, does it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know what it is. And then
we all know.
I'm going to sell Dallas Turner. I just think he's kind of the one that people are most excited about. He's going first in most drafts. He's usually the first one of these 3 taken off the board. So I think that's the guy I'm going to try to sell. And I think he's also got the longer time to get ramped up and contribute. So.
And my approach to these 3 rookies right now is kind of like that approach, that 1-2 year window. I'm actually buying Dallas Turner because I feel that he's going to have more path to snaps this season. There's less competition right now, I feel, in Minnesota, less established competition. We got Van Ginkel there, who's coming off an injury, who's kind of learning his spot there. We've got Jonathan Grenard, who's there, is probably going to be the cornerstone on the defensive end. But I think a path for snaps for Dallas Turner is much clearer than the other 3, or the other 2, excuse me. I'm holding Verse for the same reasons you said. He's going to have those spike weeks where he's going to get it, where then he's going to kind of disappear. But I just think those snaps are going to be a little more volatile. And I'm actually out on Latu this year, not because of the player, not because of the neck injury, not because of where he went. Or actually, it's more because of where he went. I think he has the most crowded defensive line room, and he's going to have fewer opportunities for snaps. And I'm going to buy him at the end of the season from a disgruntled Latu manager after the season that he doesn't pan out like he does. So I'm going to play the guy who's got the hot hand right now in Dallas Turner, and then I'm at the end of the season flip him I'm going to trade Dallas Turner for Latu and something else later. So
I'm worried about Turner. I'm worried about Turner because both Van Ginkel and his defensive coordinator came from Miami. So I think Van Ginkel knows the scheme already and is going to plug right in. But I could be wrong.
So
that's the fun of this. Nobody can see the future.
What? This is 100% accuracy. We don't mess around. So, all right, moving on to our final grouping here. These are some players way down at the very bottom of our IDP drafts, but this is where you win your leagues. This is where you win your best ball drafts, is hitting one of these players. Right now we have Jonathan Cooper is DL 53, Yaya Diaby is DL 55, and Malcolm Koonce is DL 56. So Eric, one last time, who you buying, who you selling, and who you holding from this trio?
I'm going to go with sell first because I'm just staying away from the Broncos' edges. I don't know what to make of that group. There's Bonito. There's Cooper. There's the guy I can't think of his name right now.
Jonathan Franklin Myers.
There's Franklin Myers. There's Browning is the one I was thinking of.
Oh yeah, very right.
They just have they have a lot of guys. I don't know how the playing time's going to come out, and so I think Cooper seems to be pretty popular still because he flashed last year. So I'm going to try to sell him, see what I can get. I'm going to hold Yaya Diaby. He flashed a little bit at the end of last year, but his underlying stats weren't really great. But I'm going to hold him and hope I think he's got the path to playing time there. Not a lot of competition, so see how he grows in year two and hold on to him. And then Koonce. Koonce was really pretty good last year. And now with Tyree Wilson moving more, playing some inside more, I think it opens up more snaps for Koonce. And he had a 14.2% win rate last year, which is really solid. A 79 pass rush grade. So I really like Koonce, and I want to buy him.
I'm 100% agreement on all three of these takes as well. I'm all in on Koonce this year. I know that he had more sacks in the last half of last season than he did in his previous career, but playing alongside Max Crosby, like you said, Wilson is kind of getting bumped inside, and the Raiders brought in Wilkinson from the Miami Dolphins. That whole defensive line unit it's a scary defensive line unit. So I think that his job is going to be much easier this year than it was in 2023 even. So, and like you mentioned, he has very efficient PFF scores. He was an 81.3 overall compared to the 65.2 and the 60.8 of Cooper and Diaby respectively. So Koonce is definitely going to be my buy there. I'm selling Cooper if I can. He's a 7th round pick. Great story. He had some good games, but I think, like you mentioned, this is just a very crowded room. You mentioned 4 or 5 names, and you didn't mention that they picked a 3rd-round pick out of Utah, Jonah Ellis. Yeah. I love that kid. He plays like his hair's on fire, screaming after the ball all the time. I just think it's a matter of time before he starts to eat into those snaps, and it might be sooner than later. So I'm out on Cooper. I'm going to try to sell while I can, and then like you mentioned, Diaby is going to be my hold. He started to flash. I know that the Bucs drafted Braswell in the 2nd in the draft, but I think that's probably more trouble for Joe Tryon-Shoyinka than it is for Diaby. So I think that the Bucs are trying to go with the youth movement there, especially on the defensive side of the ball, outside of Levante David. But I think, he's going to be my hold, and just he did well for a rookie. So let's see what happens in year 2. Let's see if we can revisit that. So.
He's only got to beat Shoyinka and Anthony Nelson out. So, and I like Anthony Nelson. He's a former Hawkeye, but I think he can do it.
That's some high praise. I know you're Hawkeye Nation there. So Eric, before we put a ribbon on this episode, you got any final words of wisdom or any takeaways from kind of going through your research for the episode?
If you're contending, look for the vets that are coming off of injury, that maybe are undervalued. If you're not contending and building for the future, look for those young guys, I guess, that are starting to flash before they break out, and try to add them, I guess, is my main advice. And in best balls, this isn't a best ball show, but fade rookies and best balls.
Even Hawkeye cornerbacks.
Even Cooper DeJean.
Whoa, ooh. So you're not taking him third or fourth overall at the secondary in the second? Okay.
I haven't taken him at all.
Oof.
He goes way too early.
Yes. I was shocked that he was like in top 5 at the defensive back position at one point this season. I was like, what are we doing? Like,
yeah, the guys he's going in front of, it just makes no sense to me. We don't even know his role. So
fade corners. So, all right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the IDP After Show. Eric and I would love to hear your thoughts on how we broke down the positions. We'd also love to hear some of your favorite buys, sells, and holds at the moment. So make sure you drop those down in the comment section below. We'd love to hear those nuggets anytime. Join me next time as I'm joined by Dynasty Trip from footballguys.com. And we're going to continue our IDP Battle Royale series, this time taking a look at the AFC and NFC South Division. So be sure to sack that like, subscribe, and notification button so you don't miss an episode of the IDP Show or the IDP After Show. For Eric and myself, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch up with you next time.
This was the IDP After Show.